the Global Silicon Valley Symposium. It's been a long time in the coming, and I thank my conspirators and co-conspirators and collaborators, Professor Lindner and Professor Adams, for making this happen. And I also especially thank the International Institute for making this wonderful grant possible, where we are thinking about not just comparing the usual suspects one to each other and aligning ourselves to, for example, a Silicon Valley, but comparing today or thinking about what might it mean to compare Skolkovo and Shenzhen. Our packed itinerary for today will be half on in this room and half on North Campus and Arts and Architecture, which again I think speaks about our collaboration, School of Information, STEMPS, School of Art and Design, and Taubman College of Architecture. And you can see lectures. Our speakers for today are Eric Pan, Olga Alexakova in the morning, and Marian O'Donnell, Sergei Sitar, and David Lee in the afternoon. And we will have time for discussion after their lectures. And now for a short contextual introduction, I'll give a word to my collaborator.
Thank you, Irina. So before I hand it over to Professor James Holloway, I just wanted to say a couple of introductory words about why Shenzhen and Skolkovo. So what you see here on the screen is a screenshot of a documentary produced by Wired UK that celebrates Shenzhen as the Silicon Valley of hardware. And this is a fairly recent story. So this documentary was actually released by Wired in 2015, and it followed on similar kind of stories about Shenzhen. This is a quote from Joey Ito, the head of the MIT Media Lab. He actually toured to Shenzhen with students from engineering at the MIT Media Lab and visited Shenzhen, and these are his reflections from Shenzhen when he came back. He said what was happening in Shenzhen, they were not making PowerPoints or prototypes. They were fiddling with manufacturing equipment and innovation right there on the factory floor. The kids in Shenzhen make new cell phones like the kids in Palo Alto make websites. So there's a rainforest of innovation going on, and what you thought you could only do with software, they are doing it with hardware. So this was a big deal. You know, the head of the MIT Media Lab makes a statement about Shenzhen, and in part, you know, through statements like this, the image of Shenzhen really transformed, because until very recently, this is really just, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, very few people actually knew much about Shenzhen, especially people in sort of the maker, innovation, tech entrepreneurship scene in the United States. So this was really an image that built up very, very recently, and many of the people here in the room today, our speakers and participants, helped contribute to that change from a place that was largely known through contract manufacturing, cheap labor, into a rising hub that is now called the Silicon Valley for hardware. And then we have an adjacent story in Skolkovo. So this is a recent article that came out about Skolkovo, entitled "The Skolkovo Project: Can Russia Recreate Silicon Valley?" ? And here, you know, the article unpacks in detail how both the Russian government and Cisco teamed up to build that kind of Silicon Valley for Russia. And the news media article here reads, "Tomorrow Silicon Valley may not be in California or even the United States, but it may actually be in Russia, and it may be powered by Cisco." And a similar story here by The Guardian. The reporter here talks about, you know, goes inside Skolkovo, Moscow's self-styled Silicon Valley, but also, you know, mentions here some suspicion if the so-called tech periphery is actually indeed going to be able to live up to the standards of Silicon Valley. So sort of a question mark here at the end of like how these rising innovation hubs elsewhere outside of the United States are going to play out. So what you see in all of these stories about both Shenzhen and Skolkovo as these rising innovation hubs is that Silicon Valley is put sort of as the model and the ultimate path towards innovation, at least how news media articles and prominent players talk about these regions. And Both stories also share that what was considered the former tech periphery, like where innovation wasn't happening, is now celebrated as a rising innovation hub. And both also hint at stories about the future, that there's aspirations that are about nation building. So we are gonna investigate these very questions during our symposium, and I'm really looking forward to this, to have experts from these two regions in the room who are gonna tell us a much more complicated and complex story than the media will tell us. Before we launch into our first speaker, I'm delighted to introduce James Holloway, who will give us some opening remarks. So James Holloway is the Vice Provost of Global Engagement and Interdisciplinary Academic Affairs. He joined the faculty of University of Michigan as an assistant professor for nuclear engineering and radiological sciences in January 1990. In 2007, he was named an Arthur Thurner Professor in recognition of outstanding contribution to undergraduate education. And later that year, he became Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education for the College of Engineering. As Vice Provost for Global Engagement and Interdisciplinary Academic Affairs, Holloway is focused on the ways in which the University of Michigan engages the world through both scholarship and education, and I had the great pleasure to experience this firsthand when I was traveling with James and Amy Conker to Shenzhen in last fall. James also spent his childhood living in Thailand, so also brings a unique global perspective through his coming of age, and became a global citizen himself very early on. He has managed the University of Michigan relationship with the UM Joint Institute. Is that Chiao-Tong University? Yes, Shanghai Chiao-Tong University since 2007, so there have been connections to China as well. And he most recently taught a course on user needs and assessment and the cultural context of design for University of Michigan and African students in Kumasi, Ghana. So please join me in welcoming James for the opening remarks.